Occam's razor is a philosophical principle that can be paraphrased as, other things being equal, simpler explanations are generally better than more complex ones. This largely holds true in our daily lives, and explanations for crimes are no different. Occam's razor sure took a beating when the facts of tonight's case were finally uncovered. This is the story of the most unlikely and elaborate kidnapping you've ever heard of. And this is absolutely criminal.
And how did you meet your wife?
We met back in 2011 when, being my usual forgetful self, I left my ATM card in an ATM. She tried to chase after me to give it back to me, couldn't catch me, and then just tracked me down, brought me this card, and I messaged her back. Now, I knew it was a female. That's about all I knew about her. And said, hey, can I please buy you lunch? Thank you so much. That was really nice of you. And we, chatted back and forth a little bit. That kind of turned into dinner, and things went from there. We fell pretty quickly for each other. We dated for a while, then boyfriend, girlfriend, and then moved in. And then unfortunately, one of my mental health episodes kind of separated us.
Although this man sounds like he's relaying a familiar story of falling in love, the mental health episode mentioned here was anything but typical. He didn't wallow in bed for a week, cut himself, or even go on a wild crime spree. He meticulously masterminded a crime that was so brazen and bizarre that it was disbelieved from the beginning. And he might have gotten away with it too, if it wasn't for one problem. He wanted credit. But snarky coverage by mainstream and social media made it clear nobody believed a word the victims said, as reporters had trouble keeping a straight face.
Hoax or not, those anonymous emails sent to two newspapers say the kidnapping was absolutely real. The abductors claim they drilled into the woman's window and used squirt guns that looked like real guns to take Huskins away. And even stranger, the emails say it was a practice run for kidnapping future high-profile victims.
I feel like something to be jettisoned if necessary. I feel like I could disappear.
Like Amy Dunn, Denise's kidnapping was all a hoax. She is alive and well, found by police 400 miles away.
And YouTubers, of course, had a field day.
Missing white woman found. Then she goes missing again. It is no longer believed that a California woman was kidnapped a day after 100 police, 40 detectives, and a jet were mobilized to find her. Denise Huskins went missing from her boyfriend's house in Vallejo on Monday, reappeared on Wednesday, then was missing again as of Wednesday night.
Denise Huskins met Aaron Quinn when they both worked as physical therapists in the Northern California town of Vallejo. Aaron was on the rebound from a messy breakup with another coworker we will call Jennifer. But against his better judgment, he fell for Denise. He was falling hard, but inside there was still something burning for Jennifer. His heart, in a way, was still hers, even though she stomped on it at least twice. Jennifer had a thing for boys in blue, and had an affair with a Vallejo police officer and an FBI man. In spite of the infidelity, there was something about Jennifer that Aaron couldn't put out of his mind. One night, he left his phone unlocked, and Denise took a little peek at his text messages and found that Aaron and Jennifer had been communicating this whole time. And it was clear Aaron was still pining for Jennifer. Denise was livid. While she didn't immediately end things, the couple spent a week apart. The short break gave time for remorseful Aaron to rethink his choices and for Denise to find forgiveness. They would meet at his place Wednesday night, just to talk and go from there. All that talking led to lovemaking on the living room sofa. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't alone. A small drone hovered outside their huge bay window, silently recording their most intimate moments. Someone was watching. Aaron locked all the windows and doors before the couple went upstairs to his bedroom, where they fell asleep in each other's arms around midnight. Just 3 hours later, they were startled awake by a masked invader telling them to remain calm and do as they were told. It was a robbery, and if they behaved themselves, nobody would get hurt. Flashlight beams and red laser dots danced across the bedroom, suggesting several unwelcome visitors were roaming around the house. After blacked-out swim goggles were fitted over their eyes, they were moved to separate rooms, where headphones were placed over the ears of both hostages. Then a recording began, and they could hear what they described as yoga music mixed with wind chimes. A robotic, digitally altered voice explained that the interlopers were part of an organization of gentlemen criminals, sort of a poor man's Ocean's 11. They collected personal and professional debts, kidnapped for ransom, and settled feuds both foreign and domestic. They wore full wetsuits over their clean-shaven bodies, as well as gloves, face masks, and military-style boots. They would both be given a mixture of NyQuil and Valium to drink. If they refused, it would be injected instead. The couple cut their losses and knocked back the noxious concoction. The combination of benzos and antihistamines, he explained, worked best to subdue their subjects and ensure a smooth operation. The nocturnal terrorist forced Denise to zip-tie Aaron's wrists and ankles. He secured Denise in the same fashion, picked her up, and carried her fireman style to another room in the house. Though separated, Aaron and Denise could both hear what sounded like multiple people downstairs, ransacking and robbing their home. The recordings continued to play, and the strange voice said that Jennifer would be taken and held for 48 hours. Both Denise and Aaron were shocked to learn that the whole mission they were on was meant for Aaron's ex-girlfriend. Was it a case of mistaken identity? Both women were blonde and white, but the similarities ended there. But they were here now, so they decided they might as well practice their protocols. Aaron would need to withdraw $8,500, await further instructions if he wanted to see Denise alive and unharmed. Little did he know that what seemed like an end goal would really be the start of a living nightmare. Denise lived her own nightmare, and it was looking less and less likely she would wake up from it. After giving Aaron a crash course in kidnapping for ransom, the attacker turned his attention to his prime target. He lifted Denise, carried her to the garage, and opened the trunk of a 2000 Toyota Camry, Aaron's daily driver. Her wrists and ankles still bound, he put Denise in the trunk, where she laid in the fetal position. Destination unknown. Bound in the trunk of her boyfriend's car, being driven by a madman in a wetsuit, she was sure she wouldn't survive whatever happened to her next. After stopping in the middle of nowhere, her kidnapper lifted her from the trunk and clumsily carried her to the trunk of another car. That was followed by another long drive. Following another endless ride, they arrived at the kidnapper's lair, a modest lakeside cabin. He removed her from the trunk, still blindfolded, and sat her up against his garage wall and disappeared inside the house for about an hour. She could hear scrubbing and scouring, followed by plastic sheets being unfurled. She must have known there was no innocent explanation for that. When he came back, he instructed her to strip and shower, and explained the organization took all these measures to avoid leaving DNA evidence. Whatever happened here, there would be no trace of Denise Huskins left behind. Denise did as she was instructed, and she was blindfolded, zip-tied, and placed on a bed. When the voice came into the room to administer her next dose of sedative, he told her there was a problem. His group had decided that because they had abducted the wrong woman, because of bad intel, they'd done no research on Denise. Therefore, they had nothing to blackmail her with to ensure her silence. The committee had decided they needed a sex tape. It had to look like a random and willing hookup and would be released to her boyfriend and her family if she went to the police. And in his best impersonation of an unwilling recruit, he broke the news to Denise that he had been selected for the dirty deed. She was ordered to make it look as believable as she could, lying there naked except for her blacked-out swim goggles as he violated her body. She would later say that as soon as he had finished, there was no way in hell it looked consensual, and that meant he would be back for a second take. She just knew it. Later, her captor said she would have to make a different kind of recording. He had written a script for her that included a reference to a plane crash that happened hours earlier. In that disaster, a suicidal co-pilot had hijacked his own airplane and flew himself and 150 others into the side of a mountain in the French Alps. She was at the mercy of a madman of her very own, and she must have felt as helpless as those passengers and crew. So the proof of life audio recording was made and sent to police and a local TV reporter.
My name is Denise Huskins. She kidnapped my wife's fine. Earlier today, there was a plane crash in the Alps.
The accompanying email also said Denise will be released the next day, but back at the Vallejo Police Department, before that communication was received, Quinn sat alone in a bare gray interview room. Detective Matt Mustard was really putting the squeeze on him. After reading Aaron's written statement of the morning's events, he made it clear he didn't believe it. At one point, he accused Aaron of killing Denise, hiding her body, and inventing a wild cover-up story. Even his emails came in from the self-described perpetrator, claiming responsibility. The police invented new wild theories of their own. Obviously, Aaron did murder his girlfriend, and then set those pre-written emails to automatically send while police questioned him. Or maybe Denise was still alive, penning those emails and playing hostage. Meanwhile, somewhere, far away, Occam surely rolled over in his grave. We'll be right back. If you're enjoying Absolutely Criminal and want to see more stories like this, please take a moment to hit thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell. Then check out our Patreon exclusives, because you don't want to miss a thing. Now back to our story. Later that day, Aaron discovered that if the police read the kidnappers' emails, they certainly never acted upon them. Later, he would say he was infuriated and thought the police might have cost Denise her life. Every signal that said Aaron didn't write this atrocious mess of a script, that it really did happen, was allegedly ignored by the Vallejo PD. Even when questioned by the FBI, he didn't feel like the agency took it seriously as a kidnapping. Back in the plastic-lined room of that disgusting cabin, Denise's worst fears were confirmed. The organization deemed the first sex recording not authentic enough. It was implied that if she ever wanted to see Aaron, or anyone, ever again, she'd better make it look real. Exchanging the swim goggles for a more willing-looking necktie, Denise closed her eyes and held on for dear life. She did what she had to do. She survived. She would later say she only got through the unimaginable situation was to pretend she was reuniting with Aaron. The next morning, the monster woke her up and told her it was time to go. He would actually make good on his promise to release her unharmed, but there were conditions. Swearing on the lives of her family, she was not to mention the sexual assaults to police. Those terms likely sounded pretty agreeable in exchange for her life. It was an 8-hour drive, but she would be allowed to ride up front. With a double dose of his malicious elixir and a pair of oversized sunglasses, she would look like she was just dozing on a long drive. She was dropped off near her mother's house in Huntington Beach. She was instructed to kneel just a few feet from the road, count to 10 slowly, then remove her blindfold. She did so, and her imprisonment was over just as quickly as it had begun. Her torment, however, was far from over. She was about to be victimized by the very people that should have been her heroes. Just as he had with Aaron, Detective Matt Mustard squirted out accusations at Denise. It was a hoax. She didn't look like a kidnapping victim to him. Did she ever ask him to let her go? 2015 ended with Sergeant Mustard in the hall with the trophy for Officer of the Year. You can decide for yourself what that implies about the rest of that department. Denise and Aaron had their much overdue reunification, where each feared the other would blame them for the events of that awful morning. Nothing could have been further from the truth, and they talked for hours. She confided in him that she was raped and recorded, a fact she had actually denied to police. She had been threatened that if she mentioned sex, his organization would harm her and her family. They threatened Aaron's life too, but he was adamant that she had to tell the police. She bravely did so, and detectives were predictably skeptical. Denise Huskins' mother alleges that Mustard took her aside and said, in his experience, women who've been sexually assaulted often pretend it is happening again to relive the thrill of the experience. So that's the kind of lopsided logic Denise was facing here. Later that same evening on March 25th, Lieutenant Kenny Park, for some reason, felt the need to call the following press conference.
Imagine devoting all of our resources, 24 hours a day, on what I will classify as a wild goose chase. It's a tremendous loss. It's disappointing, it's disheartening, and the fact that we've essentially wasted all of these resources for really nothing is upsetting.
A few days later, the mystery maniac sent an email to Lieutenant Park describing the abduction in meticulous detail and demanded he apologizes to Denise for calling her a hoaxer. Finally, some logic we can get behind, but there was no apology forthcoming, and over the next 3 months, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn were the targets of ridicule from the public and tabloids alike.
It is Mr. Quinn and Ms. Huskins that owes this community an apology.
She gave a proof of life audio file. She basically says, I'm fine, I've been kidnapped. No. Everything sounds phony.
June 5th, 2015, a couple was asleep in their home when at 3:34 a.m. they were awoken by flashlights, red lasers, and threats to their lives. The husband made the decision to fight the attacker, and in the scuffle, the nocturnal intruder lost his cell phone when it dropped to the floor. They successfully scared him off by bluffing that they had a gun.
But then a striking twist. Court documents unsealed today detailing a home invasion last month, eerily similar to Huskins' case. That investigation leading the FBI to this home in South Lake Tahoe.
That cell phone was traced to a man. His name was Matthew Muller.
Inside, officials report finding Huskins' boyfriend's laptop and in a stolen car outside, goggles with blonde hair, just like Huskins, still attached. The car's navigation system, they say, still had the Huntington Beach address in its history, where Huskins was dropped off in March.
June 8th. At 7:15 in the morning, police surrounded Matthew Muller's cabin and took him into custody. There had been a few unsolved break-ins and sexual assaults with the same MO around the area for weeks. In each incident, victims were made to drink a mixture of NyQuil and Valium and were assaulted in a similar fashion to Denise and Aaron. An alert and competent Alameda County detective looked at the Vallejo case and compared it to hers. All the little details matched up, and she was surprised they called it a hoax. She contacted Mustard and the FBI. June 25th. FBI special agents finally met with investigators from the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. Aaron and Denise were informed of their findings, but the FBI needed them to keep quiet about it for the sake of the investigation. So for 2 more weeks, they were still the selfish hoaxsters who faked a flamboyant kidnapping for attention, I guess? While police were quick to accuse the couple of fakery, they never really provided a good explanation as to why anyone would ever do that. Finally, on July 13th, the FBI announced in a press release that they had arrested Matthew Muller for the kidnapping in Vallejo. Denise and Aaron met up with their attorneys and had a press conference that afternoon.
Nearly 4 months ago, we told you that Denise Huskins was right, that she was not only innocent of perpetrating a hoax, but that she was a victim of a very serious and violent crime.
On July 20th, following a massive public backlash, Chief Andrew Badu issued a formal statement apologizing for the comments made during the initial investigation. They still maintain that they took the correct investigative steps with the information they had at the time. March 16th, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn would finally be able to confront Matthew Muller on their own terms. During Muller's sentencing hearing, they both looked their attacker in the eyes and told the world all the shocking details of what he had done to them. And this time, the world believed.
Denise Huskins confronted the man who kidnapped, raped, and threatened to kill her, staring down and delivering her statement directly to Matthew Muller, saying, "The voice has a face, it has a name. Now we finally meet face to face, eye to eye. I am Denise Huskins, the woman behind the blindfold, the woman you drugged, tortured, raped, and attempted to manipulate." Huskins' testimony at one point describing her sexual assault and how she feared she was going to die left her overcome with emotion. The testimony left many in the packed courtroom in tears.
Muller, a Harvard-educated lawyer, was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison for the kidnapping and sexual assault of Denise Huskins back in 2015. He also drugged and tied up her boyfriend, Aaron Quinn.
In this interview Muller gave from prison in 2017, he was relaxed, talkative, and at times a little charming. He claims that when he pled guilty, it was out of enormous concern for Denise and Aaron's well-being. If nothing else, Matthew Muller is a giver.
Last time I pleaded, there were a number of reasons for that. Some of those will come out, but probably the biggest was that I just fell into a really severe depression while I was at the Sacramento jail. I didn't really care what happened to me. I didn't care if I went to prison for 1 year, 20 years, 50 years, because I pretty much had fixed plans to die anyway. And I had already decided that it was best to handle things a certain way. I wanted to try to do something for the victims, and it seemed like the best thing for me to do was to just kind of take a dive. And that led into the depression. And after that, I decided to just let that stand, even though there's an opportunity to come back and challenge it.
Sexual abuse in prison is a serious subject, and we certainly don't wish to make light of it. But some of you may want to strike up the world's tiniest orchestra, microviolins and all, to accompany this next segment.
It turns out that before I was brought here, I had actually just suffered a rape and a beating at the instigation of Bureau of Prisons officials. I was trying to help an innocent inmate named Christopher Eads. They didn't like that, so they basically put me in with some inmates and said, hey, any sort of raping or beating you feel like doing on this guy, that's just fine. We tried to ask the Solano County District Attorney's Office, can you please wait? Can you give us a couple of months just so that I can recover enough so that I can face the charges? And also my attorney right now that we had contracted for this was out of the country. Mr. Quinn and Ms. Huskins was aware of this as well. And I guess they just said, no, we're not going to give you any sort of a delay. I've been told they were the ones who tried to time this so that I would be here. I don't know if they were trying to create some kind of a media event around their marriage and have these factors together. I don't know if it's coincidence.
As the perpetrator prattled on, he didn't miss one more opportunity to blame the victims. He claimed that because of his alleged rape and inconvenient timing, his appeal was in shambles. He would just have to represent himself. That would mean he would be doing the cross-examination of his own victims in open court.
There's really not time to bring an attorney up to speed on this, so I pretty much got to go with what I've got. I'm the only one with enough factual understanding of this and of the legal issues really to do it at this point for the first few weeks. After that, I'll be passing it off to an attorney, of course.
Near the end of the interview is something tantamount to a confession. He's talking to the reporter about the legal help he's given inmates, although he is comparing it to Huskins and Quinn's situation. He has a hard time imagining what it must be like to be falsely incarcerated.
There's a shocking number of innocent people in prison, more than I ever would have guessed. And trying to help them out is actually what Aaron and Denise had said that they wanted me to do. I was trying to do exactly that. I don't have a very long shelf life in restrictive conditions of confinement, which is what jail usually is. I just lasted about 8 weeks in the hole, which is kind of similar. After that, I very nearly committed suicide. I was interrupted by my cellmate. So I don't know how long I have until I become too depressed again. And at that point, I won't care.
We will update you on his prison shelf life going forward. Denise and Aaron decided to move on with their lives together. The city of Vallejo agreed to pay the couple $2.5 million for their inept investigation and defamatory public statements. But those were necessities that should have been wrapped up long ago and seemed inconsequential to what happened next. Aaron proposed to Denise, and in 2018 the couple married, surrounded by the love of their friends and family. March 25th, 2020, as if concluding a screenplay for a romantic thriller, on the 5th anniversary of the moment that changed their lives were about to change again. Their daughter Olivia was born. In a June 2021 New York Post interview, Aaron was quoted saying of Olivia, "She is our happy ending." Today, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn are stronger than ever. Their bond was forged in a crucible of that one moment in time, the spring of 2015, when at 3 a.m., Matthew Mueller slunk into their bedroom and announced his presence by saying, "Wake up."